So, Madam President, first of all, I'm very thankful from our audience and from our country that you found the time for our channel and for our audience. And we are very thankful to you and to your nation that help us in such tough time. And still, my first question will be about support. We have a tremendous support from the people of Georgia, and we feel it every day. But on the other hand, there's been signs that the parliament are less, let's say, active in this support, especially now. And it's a little bit more careful towards Russian Federation. Maybe it's on the first point of view. But my question is, aren't they afraid to lose in this situation the support and trust from your society?
Well, you're asking me what they, meaning the parliament,
yeah.
the government,
can
or not be afraid of. It's very difficult for me to answer in their place. I think that what is important today, and you're very right in that, is the total support of the Georgian population and of the Georgian nation. And that's very, very normal, because it's a reflection of a very long history that our countries have in common, of struggles that we have had together towards the regime in which both our nations were imprisoned at that time. And we have had a lot of very common experiences. So it cannot be different, and it cannot be different from a country that has 20% of its territory up to this day occupied by Russia. We might not have the same means as some of our European partners to express this support in very material terms, but I think that the moral support of the Georgian population cannot be doubted. And if my word has any meaning and any power and any strength, it is to represent these people that have elected me because of that, because I represent both the Georgian immigration that has left Georgia at the time of the Russian occupation in 1921, and because I represent the truly pro-European part of Georgia, which is very much the very great majority of this population. The rest is for the others to answer.
Yeah, sure. Talking about the unity inside of politics of Georgia, there's a question, because lately even the European Union rapidly talked about disuniting inside the politics of Georgia. And I would want to quote even Madam President von der Leyen, that said that Georgia must now come together politically to design a clear path towards structural reform and the European Union. So we recommend to assess for Georgia how it meets a number of conditions before granting it candidate status. And because of this, I would ask you, when will Georgia have this unity inside of politics? Maybe the war in Ukraine in this situation can help, or maybe the sanctions towards some, let's say, powerful oligarchs of Georgia would help this situation, make this unity inside.
First of all, I think that disunity has not been invented by any European commentator. We know that we are extremely polarized in Georgia. Maybe the population is less polarized than the political parties, and that is a consequence of the latest years that we've had in Georgian politics, and polarization has been only increasing. I would just note that polarization is not something that is specific to Georgia. I think some very big countries today are confronting this very same, very major, I would say, tragedy for a country, especially tragedy for Georgia at the time when we're facing the biggest chances to move more quickly towards the European Union. And that acceleration is no doubt to be attributed to the Ukrainian extremely courageous war reaction to the aggression, and the way Ukraine has been showing this solidarity. We have not been able, and I've been one very big proponent of depolarization and trying to work on that with the society. It has not happened. I was thinking that two subjects were subjects that we should reach depolarization, and that was European integration and solidarity to Ukraine. And this is reached with the people, and they have shown it on the streets of Tbilisi, not once, but many times, but it has not been reached through the political parties. And I don't have the means to bring those political parties. I brought them once in this very room to sign all together the Charles Michel document. And it seems to me today that it was in another century because we were this close to really making a huge step towards the same way as when I recall the Trio Association meeting in Batumi when President Zelensky, President Sandu and myself were greeting Charles Michel, who was coming for the third time in Georgia in a very short period. I think that it was there too a very big step towards this aspiration of Georgia that does not date back to these very recent times, but is a very old, centuries old aspiration of the Georgian nation. And suddenly we see all of that fading away in a way, and that is something that I resent very much, that the Georgian population resents very much, and we have to mobilize certainly in order not to let those chances go away.
So who can help to get back to the agenda, let's say?
I think
the people.
The people.
Yeah, the people.
The people. It's in their hands. It's very difficult. I'm accused every other day of not having any real power. I have the power to speak in the country, and I think that I'm listened by a very great number of people, and I have the power to speak outside the country. I very much hope that I will be able to join all the people that will unite with Ukraine on the 24th of February, wherever that will be. I don't yet know the exact plans, but I think that it will be very important for Georgia to be represented there together with everybody else, because the outside unity is also very important. And want to underline something very clearly, that anything and anyone that does something to divide Ukraine from Georgia through declarations, through statements, through misunderstandings, I don't know how to qualify, but all of that plays only for one player, and that is our Russian neighbor.
I see. Well,
so we have a duty to be united, despite everyone that tries to disunite us.
Hopefully. Talking about people, and I want to ask you as a leader of nation, we have a lot of refugees from Ukraine since the start of war. And after September, you have a lot of refugees from mobilization from Russian Federation. And at the same time, these people are gathered in one place at one time. So how you manage to balance the attitude of Georgians towards these different representatives of the countries who are currently in a hot stage war? How you manage to do it? Especially it's interesting about the Russians that were involved in the war in 1992 and 28 and intervented the Algerian crisis in 2004 as we say elder brother.
That's very interesting. First of all, in Adjara, they didn't intervene.
Okay.
That was a time when Russia was letting things happen, let's say. I don't know how that... but I think it's very interesting. I think on one side, it's the very peculiar character of Georgian, maybe traditions, maybe that we called in the past tolerance. That was a very strong characteristic of Georgia over centuries. That's why we have minorities almost from everywhere in the region. Living together. We have Armenians and Azerbaijani origin citizens that, despite the wars that have been going on between the two countries, manage here to live in peace. So it's an old tradition. Arabs were welcome in the country when Georgia was defending Christianity. So it's very strange. And that is one part of this Georgian miracle. The other thing is that we shouldn't believe only in miracles. And we should be careful. I think there has not been any serious incident in the past year, either between Georgians and the Russians that have come, and we are an occupied country. Territories are occupied, and I don't know very many other countries that would accept this situation. And there have not been any incidents either between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Of course, there might be frictions and words exchanged, but nothing more. And that's something that we have to keep that way. And to keep it that way, and I've been pressing for that, we need to have full control of the situation. We have to know who enters the country. We have to be careful that they do not enter with a free pass to stay in Georgia. So I'm in favor of revisiting the visa regime and making it shorter so that we have a chance to review after a certain time what the persons are doing. I think we should have more checks and controls over who is buying what property in Georgia, who is exercising which profession with or without licenses to do so, taxi drivers. Because if not, then our population will not have the feeling that it is protected, that we have the situation under control, and then we can have different type of tensions, let's say, that could emerge. So it's very important that we keep this situation peacefully, that we do not let the numbers, that's why I'm against the opening of the flights with Russia. Absolutely. I don't think there is any reason why a country that is occupied 20% should reopen flights that have been closed by Russia, as if they had some things to make sanctions about.
Absolutely.
And it's quite absurd. So one thing is hospitality towards people that in their majority are not big supporters of Putin and certainly not of the war. The other thing is not to be hospitable to the point of being stupid.
Mm-hmm. And legal instruments. Using.
Of course, legal instruments.
But on the other hand, we understand that there's information that thousands of Russians already maybe got or will have a chance to get the citizenship of Georgia. So in this situation, is there any risk that these people with new Georgian passports might be somehow used in a political competition in the future?
Well, that's not true. Because that's one of the things that I control.
Okay.
Almost. The nationality to the Russians that are coming in the country, they have to go through the commission in which I have representatives. My representatives are not accepting any request for citizenship coming from Russians. With two exceptions. One is the Georgians of origin that were living in Russia, and there we are controlling what was their past, but if they're Georgians, if they speak Georgian, we can give a positive, we can, it's not an automatic. And the other one, and I've done it twice, was for sportsmen. But that's also something that I'm going to keep under control, because if it becomes something to circumvent the decisions of the Olympic Committee, for instance, then not. If it's individual, there have been cases in which we have granted to one women's skater very recently, but these were exceptions. So that's something that I'm very worried about and that I really keep under control.
That's why it's interesting. It was interesting to stress on this from your point of view, from the first hand, like I say. Let's talk about economical influence, because from what we know of the last year, more than $2 billion were sent from Russia, came from Russia. And it can be said that this might be direct intruders into economy of Georgia. Because the economical growth of Georgia, I will quote, in December 2022 compared to December 2021 amounted to 11%, and GDP in 2022 grew by 10%. So we obviously understand that this money is good for Georgia and it must be spent in Georgia. But I want to ask you, what are the plans Tbilisi have to this money? Will it be spent to new enterprises or we might see another Dubai, maybe in some cities like Batumi, for example. So where will you spend this Russian money?
I don't think there is a strategy. I think I have not seen it. That's another thing on what I'm thinking, that we should have control and strategy. I'm not clearly part of the economic aims that are forged by the government. I think, yes, Georgia has partly benefited from these people that came, that obviously came with some money, although it's kind of a middle class. These are not the very rich people that went somewhere else in European countries or Turkey or other neighboring and Emirates. So that has partly benefited to the Georgian economy. Again, as with people that come, the first tourists or those that followed the wave of mobilization, we have to be careful. We have to control what's happening on our territory. Our banks are very strictly controlled because they are controlled by the international sanctions, and they're very eager to be very compliant, because otherwise they know that they would be under direct risk. And for a bank, that's a major risk. So that type of controls have been also on the governmental side. And this is something that should determine also. I think that our investments are directed also to Europe. These new infrastructural projects that exist with Romania, the cables under the Black Sea. These are very important projects in which there will be some investments. I understand that Anaklia is one of the priorities. So as you, I hope that this money will be used to the good use.
Mm-hmm. I just remember that in late 2000 Russia once completely stopped trade with Georgia, and even this crossing Upper Lars was closed between your countries. So it was a time where you have been living without goods from Russia. So it was interesting for us Ukrainians. Why don't you stop this trade with Russia? Or it's not the question of time for you right now?
Well, it's something that we do not control completely, because Lars crossing point is not only our crossing point, it's also that of Armenia, that doesn't have any other outside capacity to, and for Turkey. So we are in a region in which we would be blocking the only crossing point, and a crossing point through which also, as I mentioned, a number of Georgians are coming back to Georgia. So and Georgia certainly cannot afford for a very long time today to bluntly just, when it was imposed on Georgia, it's one thing, to suddenly take the decision which not many, if not any European country has taken, to completely block the imports even of cereals or things like that would be very difficult for Georgia in today's situation. So there are risks to be balanced, and again, it's a question of proper balance.
I see. So maybe the last question will be very interesting for our audience and for Ukrainians too. You said in the interview to Bloomberg, if I'm not mistaken, that you hope on the returning of all the territories of Georgia after the victory of Ukraine. So my question is how you see this process. Will it be diplomatic, or it will be martial, it will be some other instruments? And more the question is, so what can you do right now for returning these territories before the victory of Ukraine? For example, we were talking with our editors, maybe to put the contingent of soldiers on the border of Abkhazia to take away attention of Russians to this part of territory. I'm sorry, it's just an idea. Yeah, but anyways, the instruments, how to do it, actually.
We don't have the instruments. If we had the instruments, I don't know whether we would have used it, but we don't have instruments because we have Russian military forces 30 kilometers from the capital. We have two huge military bases, one in Abkhazia, the other in the Trin Valley region, a third one, the southern command of the Russian, and the fourth one in the back, which is Armenia, and then we have the Black Sea Fleet without a Georgian fleet. So the situation is very clear. We cannot play with that. And there is another a very strong argument that those populations that live in Abkhazia and in the Tskhin Valley region are our citizens, which tomorrow we want to reunite with us. It's not territories so much that we want to reunite, but we want to reunite definitely these populations and bring them into Europe. And I'm saying that the occupied territories in Georgia should be part of a peace settlement anytime when that happens, and that clearly is in the hands of Ukraine and only Ukraine, because you have the full right to be the ones to determine how things should move to that peace settlement, at what point and how. But at that time, and not because, of course, I'm talking for Georgia and I want that to happen, but I think that it should be something that the whole of Europe should want to happen, because as long as, and I've written about that many years before, the 2008 war or the Crimean aggression or the Ukrainian, I'm convinced that as long as Russia will not have to retreat from territories that do not belong to Russia, and that also includes Japanese islands. As long as that remains, the mind, the mentality of those people that will, it might not be Putin, whoever will be there, will be acting against the neighbors and against Europe in the same way. And we've seen that it gets worse and worse. It's not that it's improving, it's becoming even more and more dangerous. So it's our common future and our common interest.
Absolutely. So you're making a huge bet on Ukrainian victory.
Sure.
And we have a huge hope for your absolute help to us to make this victory as fast as we can.
I'm sure, and I think, and I'm convinced of the fact that today the world is divided into two categories. Those that believe and understand that one can defeat Russia, and those that think that it's impossible. And I've lived, I'm older than many, and I've lived at the time when the same thing happened with the Soviet Union. It was divided in two, and people were thinking that it's crazy to think that Soviet Union can one day cease to exist. Well, I belong to the side of the people that do believe.
So we wish you patience and strength. Thank
to
you very
you
much.
In
Thank
the first
you very
place.
much for this
And
interview.
maybe I can finish with saying that on the 24th of February, I hope very much that I'll be part of the whatever form of, it's not a celebration yet, but solidarity celebration, and wish the Ukrainian people to go through this strategy with as much unity and as much resilience as they have shown until now.
Thank you very much, with all our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you.